Evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to my second town hall of 2025. I wanted to start acknowledging that we're on Ngunnawal country. There was obviously some debate about welcomes to country, acknowledgements of country during the election campaign, and I think it was a good thing to get people actually thinking about why do we do it. And for me, acknowledging country is a really powerful way of acknowledging that there's a culture here that has lived for tens of thousands of years on this land. And if you look around and the problems we're facing, it's pretty phenomenal to have the kind of decision making that you can continue a culture for that long. And I think we've got so much to learn from the knowledge and wisdom of First Nations people in this country. And so really want to acknowledge Ngunnawal elders past and present, and acknowledge any First Nations people here tonight. Holding quarterly town halls is part of my commitment to people in the ACT to be accessible and accountable. I work for you, and so once a quarter I like to be able to show up, tell you a bit about what I've been up to, what's been happening, the issues I've been working on, and then really hear from you and try and answer as many questions as possible. And so that'll be the format for tonight. We're going to try and really keep the initial bit brief because I know there are lots of questions. We're going to kick off with a short presentation from the renowned Dr. Andrew Hughes from right here at the ANU, whose door I remember knocking on actually in the 2022 election when I was very new to it all and terrified of knocking on Canberrans' doors, and we had a good chat. He's going to give a bit of an overview of the election. I'll then give a brief update on priority areas, what's been happening, what hasn't been happening in terms of in Parliament, and then we'll go straight into a Q&A. We've had 45 questions already submitted on Slido. I think I'm meant to be driving this thing. So if you do want to, you can't add questions now, but you can upvote. And there's also a bunch of questions that are essentially the same or quite similar. And so I'm actually going to address a few of them after Andrew speaks, so we can free it up for more questions. But for now, let me hand over to Andrew for a quick federal election recap.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Dr. Andrew Hughes. I work here at ANU in the Research School of Management, part of the CBE. So it's a bit of an honour to be here and speak in front of my colleagues as well as people from the general Canberra community. So I'd like to thank David for the invite to be here tonight and to speak to everyone. I'm on a strict time limit of 10 minutes, and I've got someone in the audience who's going to time me as well to make sure I keep to my limit, because us academics, of course, can go on for hours on end. So just going to do a simple and brief recap of the election and the election results. So let's get into it. So, of course, Labor won. I'm just going to cover some of the big promises. I'm not going to cover everything. There would be pages and pages, and I'll run out of time very quickly. So just the big promises up there, which the government's made commitments to. And these are the things which they pushed really hard during their messaging during the campaign and developed their narrative around Anthony Albanese with as well. So we've got the HECS cuts, of course. They're one of the largest promises in the campaign, $16 billion worth. Health, of course, that was the centrepiece. Who could forget the Medicare card being held up at many press conferences by the Prime Minister? Then we've got energy, another big key promise of Labor this election to come around. Housing, national security. I'm not going to read them out, but they're up there. The economy as well, we've seen that kick off a bit of late, with that announcement to do with an Accord-style meeting between business and union groups as well. The key focus there on productivity and wages, so kicking back in a hallmark to the mid to late 1980s for those people around long enough to remember the Accord as it was run. Okay, moving right on. Let's get to some numbers. Politics is all about numbers, and it's important to look at numbers. I went far back in the time. I went to 2019, 6 years ago now. It seems so long ago. The reason why I did that was because it was the last election we had before COVID, before the world changed and some of our lives got changed with it as well. So looking up there, I've done House of Reps now by seat number, and First preference votes. I use first preference votes because it's the first choice of someone who they want to vote for and to look at. So, and they're really interesting. When you look at the numbers up there on the screen, the other thing to look at is the difference between the House of Reps and the Senate on first preference, because there is one. And a lot of the time we assume that what happens in the House of Reps follows through to the Senate. And broadly speaking, it does, but sometimes there is a variation which picks up a trend emerging on how people are identifying with political parties in Australia. So you can see how Labor have done very, very well since 2019. Obviously, it hit 94, the largest by any party in Australian political history. So the Coalition got to 94, but they were the Coalition, and that was in 1996 when John Howard got elected into government. Then you can see the rise of the independents, and it's been quite recent. If you look at, again, the primary vote count here is the one to look at in terms of how quickly the independents have resonated with people. In other words, there was a lot of disenfranchised people with the major parties, and I suppose I'm speaking quite obviously about that fact, but it's always good to look at the trend itself and how it plays out. On the other side is the Senate. The Senate, I think, is quite interesting, and the Senate's going to be what I think be the most interesting house to watch in this term of government. It is where the most diversity is in terms of the number of people who sit in the Senate, where they come from, what different states they represent, and it's becoming more and more interesting to watch in terms of how politics is being done in what used to be called the House Review, very boring, you know, not much happens, but I think will be like the stopgate measure now for Labor in this term of government to stop them and pull them up on anything which they might be going too far on. So we have this, you can see how Labor actually hasn't changed that much over time with the number of seats in the Senate. And again, you go to the Coalition, they have had a big loss. But where the gain has been, of course, has been with the Greens and, of course, minor parties and independents. This term in 2025, we have seen 4 One Nation senators elected into Parliament or be taking their place in Parliament when it resumes in July. So it's a good mix. The other thing to look at, of course, is, as I said, the primary vote count. Labor on a very low primary vote of 35%. Our governing party is only the choice or first choice of people of 35%. 65% of us vote for someone else as our first choice. It's something Labor needs to keep in their mind as they go through. All right, how am I going for time? I'm going good. 5 minutes to go. All right. So it's good to keep those numbers up because that's what Labor's seeking to protect. What's their strategy going to be? Are they going to burn some political capital to get some of the previous policies on the slide addressed or not? It's going to be interesting to watch in this term. Okay, let's go for some fun facts. I always like fun facts. Okay, so the most marginal seat for Labor, as of right now when I speak, is here in the ACT, the seat of Bean. Come on. We should be happy because for so long people have written us off as being, oh, it's just a Labor town. I hate hearing that. You know, it's like, I come from Queensland. I used to hate hearing people go, oh, you're just conservative, One Nation, rednecks. We are not, thank you very much. And don't say that to Queenslanders too much in a hurry. But that said, you can see again how the change has happened here in Canberra really quickly because we don't identify the major parties the same way we once did. That said, you might go, hang on, Andrew, but the safest Labor seat in Australia is also here in Canberra, held by Andrew Lee, the seat of Fenner, with a margin of 22%. And you might go, whoa, that's a bit of a contrast. Maybe we just haven't had the right candidate yet. Maybe we're waiting for the right time yet. Maybe the time will come. Who knows, right? You do because you vote. All right. Next thing up there is I've got some other facts and figures about Labor has 9 seats on less than 2%. I call that the super marginal category. So under 2% means that they're at risk of falling at the next election on a very mild swing. So 9 seats, that's a fair bit. They will retain government, obviously, if they lose those 9, but they'd probably like not to. But in other words, what it also means, if you're a minor party independent, 9 seats could be yours for the taking as well. It's something to think about, right? Okay. Online political advertising growth. 2019 figures I couldn't get. They should be up on the screen, sorry. I sent these yesterday, I modified the figures. But here's an interesting fact for you. In 2022, the biggest advertiser online on Google was Clive Palmer with UAP, who spent $9.9 million for a total spend of $16 million for all the parties during the campaign. we saw 5,000 ads on Google platforms in that campaign period of 30 days. This year, wait for it, $27 million was spent online. There are over 15,000 ads online running, triple the number in 3 years, space of one election campaign. The money spent was $27 million, and the biggest spend was by Labor on $7.7 million. They are amazing figures to me because it means the growth in online is growing rapidly and there's not much there to stop it. So I know David's talked a lot about online advertising, disinformation, misinformation, truth and political advertising, so it's something to watch in the digital age as well. Okay, over on David Pocock's share itself, I looked at it and how much it's grown. You notice the Liberal figure there of 17% in 2025. In 2019, their first preference count was last year, Zed Seselja won, by the way, when he ran in 2019. He had a primary vote count of low 30% range. I think it was 31, 32%. So you can see how much it's collapsed in that space of time. Again, don't see us as being for granted. I think it's a lesson here about Canberra. David mentioned about how he met me in Corwell, and we did. I was one Saturday morning, I had a knock on my front door. I'm thinking, who's this? Who's knocking on my front door? Probably someone collecting for charity or something. And I opened my door, and there's David. And he goes, wow, you opened your door. I went, and you're talking to me? And I said, why? What's going on here? And he said to me, he said, well, the previous 9 houses before you told me to get lost, but using different words. It's Corwell, you know, we're a little bit earthy and blunt with our language down that neck of the woods. But David, I just thought you'd like to know how well you've done in Corwell, and door knocking can't be neglected. Hence why your booth, the comparison figures there, speak for themselves. You've done well. It shows that people resonate more and more with you, identify with your messaging. So, job well done in Corwell, I'd say. Okay, I've got 1 minute to go. So on that point, I said to David I'd have one slide as a thinking slide. If I can get it to run, which is this one. So I'm not going to read this slide out, but just there are things for you to think about tonight or in the future, or whatever it may be. I know that the main reason to be here tonight is to talk about the university governance and other issues as well. But to me, these are some of the things to think about, both in a political sense, but also an issue sense. And there's a lot going on. Some of these issues I see as being what we call sleeper issues. So people tend to neglect them until it's too late, and then suddenly they make, become a big issue in an election campaign where people start going, hang on, this is a thing now. The poverty line, for example, I think is going to be a very big issue in the next 3 years. We're now the cost of living, but when you're hearing stories now that people can't afford to rent even, that's really distressing to hear that. We should do something about that. So for me, the government should move to address the poverty line situation. We can afford it. We're spending $1 billion on everything else. Why not spend a few $1 billion on bringing our welfare payments up to the poverty line at least? Give people dignity in my books. Yeah, just me. I'll leave that slide there, and I'll hand back to David now. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Andrew. So, I mean, they're all over the place. The priorities I was hearing from Canberrans going into election were these 4 things, with the overarching one of integrity. People wanting government to do better, to be more transparent, Parliament to hold themselves to a higher standard. I think that's a real work in progress, and there's plenty that the government can and should be doing, and taking advantage of their huge majority in the House to do that. I'll continue with the mobile officers, town halls, round tables. We've already got a couple locked in on big issues that are coming up. Andrew mentioned the Senate. See, with the new Senate numbers, Labor just need the Greens or the Coalition to pass legislation. Numbers can change pretty quickly in the Senate, as we know from last election. But the Canberra Times helpfully asked recently if I was still relevant. I guess I'm very much viewing this as an opportunity to actually be able to work on both some of the bigger picture issues that I hear from people that they want pushed harder, and then some real local issues that I think have just been neglected for a long time, and really push them hard to get change. And I think the thing that the result in Bean has done is put Labor on notice in terms of actually looking after people in the ACT. So after the election, bit of an update. The first big decision was to approve the biggest fossil fuel project in Australia. I thought it was just an appalling decision, and I think a real misleading of the Australian public, given they knew that they were going to do this before the election. They knew that it wouldn't play well, and so they held it straight after the election. They give Woodside their approval. And I dare say the 700 vote difference in places like Bean or elsewhere, it would have been a factor had the Labor Party actually come clean, that they talk about renewables, they've done some really good things on renewables, but they're also beholden to the fossil fuel industry and don't seem like they're slowing down at all when it comes to gas approvals. And they're also willing to give away a lot of our gas for free. This is something that I've been talking about a lot over the last 3 years and will continue to do so. We've got gas being exported from this country at $4 a gigajoule. We've got some big industrial users of gas here in Australia who are making things in Australia, paying $20 a gigajoule for gas. At the same time that we have companies taking our gas for free and making a huge amount of money, and then turning around and somehow not paying corporate tax. So I think this is a scam that needs to end, and you only have to compare and contrast somewhere like Norway, $2.8 trillion sovereign wealth fund, with Australia with $1 trillion of sovereign debt, and a lot of Australians who don't actually feel that wealthy in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. I've got a petition online that I'm trying to sort of build a bit more awareness and support, and so you can check that out if you'd like to. There are a couple other things that the Albanese government did after the election. One was delay foundational supports for the NDIS. I know there's a bunch of people who are really concerned about what that means, receiving a lot of correspondence, and have organised a roundtable coming up to really talk through some of the issues there. And then obviously delaying the home care, the aged care reforms, including home care packages. I think there were some really good reasons to delay parts of the aged care reform. The systems weren't in place. We simply weren't ready to do that. But it also means that older Australians waiting for home care packages are now going to wait even longer. And so myself and 9 other crossbenchers teamed up and urged the government to release at least 20,000 places ahead of time to ensure that we can start to deal with the wait list. The Royal Commission to Aged Care was scathing about wait times and basically said 6 months for someone who had high needs and was waiting for a package. 6 months was catastrophic. And we're seeing people wait 15 months at the moment. Mark Butler, who's now the health minister, when he was in opposition, he said it was a national disgrace. And so I'd love to see the Labor Party really push that hard and make some sensible changes there. The other thing that the crossbench has been pushing the government on is to have a really good faith, robust review of AUKUS. I think this is something that really hasn't had enough scrutiny. The UK has reviewed it, the US has reviewed it, and whilst the Deputy Prime Minister, Miles, will say we've reviewed it, it's not true. If you look at the Defence Strategic Review, they basically said AUKUS is a given. What else do we need to do? How do we fit it in with AUKUS? And I think Australians deserve to have a bit more transparency about the deal and whether or not we will actually get these submarines given the price tag. The other thing that we're obviously getting a lot of emails about and have been pushing hard on is public, social and affordable housing. This is something where we need the government to continue to step up. Again, they did some good things in the last term, but now's the time to really, well, I would say, change the way we think about housing. We should be thinking about it more as a human right, something that should be accessible and affordable, not as an investment vehicle. That obviously takes some tax changes to the tax arrangements, and Labor and the Coalition don't want to have that conversation. But in the meantime, we can be looking at places like the CSIRO Ginninderra site. And not long after the election, I joined with a bunch of stakeholders to really push that along. It's been 10 years since that site's been available, 3 years of negotiations. I just don't see how it should take that long when housing is such a pressing need. We've got to do better than that as a country. Integrity is up there. The NAC's not working. We've got a commissioner who doesn't seem to understand what a conflict of interest is. And I've honestly find it really astounding and really troubling that we can have an integrity body where that sort of stuff is just brushed off. I've been very public in saying that I think to rebuild trust, we do need the Commissioner to reconsider his position. But I think beyond that, we should be looking at the NAC and saying, well, what should we be doing to actually make this more transparent and accountable to the Australian people? One of the deals that Labor did on the NAC was to essentially bow to the Coalition's wish to basically not have any public hearings. The NAC can only have public hearings in exceptional circumstances, which I hear from lawyers and the experts say is just far too high a bar. And so that is something that could also be changed. And then obviously Gaza. Things are not looking good in the Middle East. Gaza continues to be bombarded, and this is the thing that I've heard from Canberrans about most in the last 3 years. Some of you may have attended the event at Parliament House with Dr. Mo. And I think there's a lot more that we can be doing as a middle power. Good to see the application of targeted sanctions, but I think Australians really want our government to be a sovereign nation, actually call out these sorts of abuses when we see it. We've now got the sitting calendar for the rest of the year. Pretty light on. Seems a bit like a part-time parliament, but only 1 week of estimates in October, which I also find quite troubling. It's how the Senate can actually hold the government to account, and the last budget estimates was cut short because of the election, and so that's something I'll be taking up with the government when we're back. I'll be looking at a number of potential Senate inquiries using the Order for the Production of Documents process, which is essentially like a Senate FOI. And we're also working on various senators, sort of private senators' bills to push things along in there. There's these parliamentary friends of groups, which are actually a really useful way to try and build some multi-partisan awareness and I guess collaboration on issues. I've co-chaired housing, tech, nature, a bunch of them. There's probably too many groups, but they are a really useful way to get to know other parliamentarians. And as Andrew mentioned, the government has indicated that the first piece of legislation will be the wiping of 20% of HECS debts. I think anyone with the HECS debt, this is welcome. No one's going to say no to it. But I'm concerned that it's not actually the big structural reform we need when it comes to HECS and higher education. I think the Job Ready Graduates program is totally failed. After 3 years, that hasn't been reformed. We're still, with the date of indexation, we're still effectively charging people interest on repayments that they've already made. That's another sensible change that should happen. And then I'm sure we'll get into some university governance stuff a bit later on. Actually had the PBO model the impact on student debt of delaying job-ready graduate reform, and it's huge. It's really saddling a whole generation of young people with debt. So uni governance, I know there's probably a bunch of you here tonight who are keen to discuss that. These issues obviously extend across multiple institutions in Australia. I think this is something that the Parliament has turned its mind to, but clearly I think there's a real urgency to actually deal with this issue, given what we're seeing play out. I've had a lot of feedback from our community on this issue. It's probably one of the things that people have stopped me in the street to talk about the most over the last few months, and just such sad stories of people who have put their lives into the ANU, love it as an institution, recognise how important it is to our nation, and have very, very serious and I think valid concerns about what is happening here. Right. So thank you for getting in touch. I've heard your concerns. I've been, speaking publicly about this. I've had a number of meetings with the Vice Chancellor to discuss issues, raise concerns, convey feedback, and I guess also publicly raise those concerns, as well as working through the committee processes and writing to the Minister, raising this with him as well, and obviously very committed to continuing that dialogue. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Many of you would have seen that I raised concerns about the ANU leadership misleading the Senate around values of contracts and what has or hasn't been happening. I've made my concerns clear and have written to the committee requesting that they look at it. Because of the procedural rules in the Senate around committees, I can't sort of say anything else publicly about it as the committee works through those, the questions of whether or not they think the Senate was misled. What I can say is that there's been a number of corrections, not just in sort of answers to me, a number of corrections that the ANU has had to give to the Senate, where they've given the Senate information that either wasn't complete or did seem to be wrong or misleading. I mean, from this, we know that the ANU has spent not the 50,000 I was told, not the 750,000 that they told Senator Sheldon, but I think it's over $3 million now that we know of on consultants. There's a line about the ongoing engagement with the University Governance Inquiry. So there was an inquiry into university governance in January this year, and pretty short time period for submissions, only 1 day of public hearings. The inquiry is due to report on the 1st of August. We're currently waiting to find out who the new chair of that committee is, and I'll be advocating very strongly to actually continue that inquiry. I think there's a really strong argument to actually open it up again. And have further hearings, and including in-camera hearings. I guess one of the things that concerns me the most is the number of people talking about a culture of fear and feeling like if you speak up, there will be consequences, and that's really troubling to hear from an institution like the ANU. As I said, I've written to the Education Minister. As the National University, it's fairly unique in that the uni essentially reports to the Minister, and I think that really gives the Parliament an avenue in the broader conversation about governance of universities to say, actually, well, what is good governance? What is the gold standard? How do we actually set that at our national university as an example for states and territories to then follow suit with their own legislation? I've also raised some concerns about potential breaches of the PGPA, the Public Governance, Performance and Accountability Act, and the Public Interest Disclosure Act, as the ANU actually sits under federal legislation. I'm not a lawyer, but based on some of the concerns I've had raised with me, and I've passed on these concerns to the minister. Should we go to questions now, or should I? Yeah. I guess maybe one other thing to say. Obviously, there was the Nixon review, pretty sobering reading. Clearly, a lot of work culturally to do. That you can't change that stuff overnight. But I guess my concern has been around the lack of transparency and real sort of open dialogue from leadership to really try and turn things around. And I think in a situation where, on the one hand, you've got cultural issues that the Nixon review highlighted, with a kind of change management strategy that really doesn't seem to have much buy-in. Very hard to address culture where everyone's just concerned about losing their job or not being able to actually speak up. So, do I press another one to hit Slido? So I'll address the first. In the Slido, there were a number of questions about ANU leadership. Sort of along the lines of, do you have confidence in ANU leadership? What needs to change at the ANU? How can this happen? Mechanisms for holding ANU leadership to account. On the first question of do you have confidence in the ANU leadership? Based on what I've seen, no. Based on what I've heard, no. I really have tried to engage in good faith on this, and just the volume of concerns from people who think are being very reasonable, saying we know things need to change, but this is not how you do it. And you're trashing an amazing institution. So I think that's a very real concern. What can be done? As I said, ANU is unique. It's an act of Parliament. There's a university governance inquiry that I mentioned. I've written to the minister. Be working to get Senate support for order the production of documents, to get things like culture surveys and other things which just haven't been released, which really should be in the public domain. I'll continue to engage with university leadership. Fiona on my team is constantly talking to them about these issues, hearing their side of the story. And then I think, as I mentioned earlier about what does good governance look like, I think that there's a real need for reform of the ANU University Council and the model that is being used. It doesn't seem to be working. I've had lots of concerns raised with me, and I think that's something that we should be looking at. What should the makeup of that look like? What sort of skills do you need? How do you actually make the appointments? Go to the floor. So if you want to ask a question, chuck your hand up. There's a couple of people in Team Pocock t-shirts who will bring a microphone to you. I'm conscious there's a fair few of us. Please keep your question with a question mark at the end. Yeah, we'll just open up, and we might alternate between Slido. Who has Slido? Oh, yeah, there we go. Cool.
Hi.
You're on.
So the rising extremism is reflected in our material insecurity. How can we expect to hold governments accountable when within their own parties are severe misconduct issues like Brittany Higgins? and there is no appropriate screening processes for harmful colleagues getting elected. The clear absence in the Women's March is a notable example. Where can we expect justice when people advocating for appropriate measures have to choose between their own safety and party saving face?
That's a good question. I think there's obviously been a lot of work done in Parliament after Brittany Higgins came forward. I think some genuinely good work in terms of trying to set up structures to hold parliamentarians to a higher standard. Still a lot of work to do. And I think anything to do with things like family and domestic violence, women's safety, yes, there's one part of it is actually having consequences, having systems that work, having police who are equipped to deal with this, and the other part is cultural change, and that's a lot harder. And so, I think one of the things I've really tried to do is encourage more men to actually speak about this. It's often framed as a women's issue. It's really, in all of us, it's a men's issue, and we need more men actually speaking about it, calling it out, and really challenging the sort of cultural constructs that allow us to live in a culture where women are fearful, are 100 plus women being murdered in the last year and a half. Certainly not the place I think most people want to live in, but that's our starting point. So I think there's a lot more work to do. You mentioned sort of screening processes for parliamentarians. That was part of your question, yeah. I mean, I think the Constitution would stop you doing anything like that. Really, if people are elected, they can be in there. But I do think we should be holding ourselves to a much higher standard, and not just on this, but this is a really important issue. And I was pretty disappointed during the election campaign that it didn't feature a bit more. There really wasn't a lot about family and domestic violence, women's safety, but clearly this matters to people. So thank you for raising it. We'll go to one Slido. So I think maybe just on the top two, as I said, there's order for the production of documents, which are essentially the Senate's equivalent of an FOI. It's been pretty disappointing in the last Labor government, the lack of compliance to some of the OPDs when it was to do with the government. I assume on something like this, if the Senate did pass an OPD, that we would get those, and that's certainly something I'll be looking to do when the Senate comes back. I mean, this is the National University. I think there should be far more transparency about how money is being spent. Go for it. Order for the production of documents. It's essentially a freedom of information through the Senate.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I've worked in the childcare industry mostly for the last 18 years, and I thought that the government departments, things that were put in place to hold the providers accountable, I was led to believe that it was effective, and that over my time I've reported at least 2 centres and 3 or 4 colleagues, and it allowed me to sleep at night because I thought something was getting done about it. But quite recently, because I tried to get out of childcare for many years, up until end of 2023, and I've been able to get other work now. Four Corners and the other ABC program, 7:30 report, have quite recently shown is it a $70-something billion industry of the providers in Australia are putting tens of thousands of Australian children at risk with the horrendous scenes that we've seen on those programs. And I worked in the industry for a long time, and I've been re-traumatised over seeing these images. I'm a private nanny now, and I'm privately employed as a private nanny, but there's no job security. But I have come out the other end, and I'm the happiest I've ever been not working in childcare centres. I've been badly affected by this. I just want to know
really
what's happening to the providers, because
Yeah.
they get slapped on the wrist, they get $2,000 penalties, and when they go underground and come out as an NDISR
different.
provider.
Yeah.
What's happening with all that?
Yeah.
I'm losing sleep these days over that.
I'm really sorry to hear about that. Thank you for raising it. Huge issue, and something I met with Minister Anne Ali about before the election, really raising concerns and saying, what is happening here? How have we allowed this to happen? There's clearly a lack of governance and actually ways for incidents to be reported and then actions to be taken. And you'd expect when you're dealing with young children that providers are held to a very high standard. Clearly that hasn't been the case. It's unpopular with some, but I really think we should be looking at the model of childcare that's provided in Australia. Is this something that we want to be a for-profit industry? It seems to me that, not for... Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd love to discuss this sometime. But yeah, I think there's a lot that we should be looking at in this space. Clearly, governance is the start. Minister Ali is obviously aware of it, working on things. But I think this is urgent, and we'll definitely be following up on it. So thank you for raising it. Top one from IRS. I agree. I do think it's an opportunity to attract talent to Australia, particularly in key areas that we clearly have identified as the direction we want to go in as a country. We have to spend a lot more time, effort and money on diversifying our economy. Being an economy where we just dig stuff up and ship it off has been great, but we can see our luck running out, and I think that is an opportunity. I've spoken to the Academy of Science about this. I've actually written to the Prime Minister about it, and I think it would be really sensible to try and get some of the best researchers in the US, if we could, to institutions here in Australia. I was about to come to that in the second one, sorry. And I guess that kind of leads into having a culture where people arrive and want to be part of it and thrive. And to that question, as I said earlier, I don't say this lightly, but nothing I've seen suggests that the current leadership are up to the task. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but based on the feedback I've received and what I've seen at Senate estimates, which I've been really annoyed about, to be frank, to sort of turn up there as our national institution and have to correct the record so many times. It's just not good enough. That you're on the big bucks, and the buck should stop with you. And so I think there is. There's obviously work to do there, and I'll continue to use whatever avenues I have in the Parliament to push for that to be addressed. To the floor. Sorry, these lights are really bright. I'm struggling to see people.
Thank you, David, and congratulations once more.
Thank you.
My question goes relating to the maritime and shipping industry.
Yeah.
As a nation, we should move towards bringing most shipbuilding into Australia to ensure that at least our younger generation become well equipped in that industry. Mm-hmm. such that we don't necessarily need to be moving most of our shipping construction outside Australia. Now, for ACT, we do have the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. What can we do to bring some part of the maritime safety areas such that like safety trainings can be conducted in ACT and bring in some of the research work that can bring revenue into ACT. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know a lot about shipbuilding, to be honest. Yeah, I do think sovereign capability is something that we should have, and yeah, I think places like South Australia have obviously a long history of being able to build things. So yeah, it sounds like you've got a really good point there. I'd be happy to chat more about it and actually see what could potentially be done, but it's not something I'm sort of deep in the weeds on. As far as bringing stuff to the ACT when it comes to maritime safety, I think it'll be a big ask. I think you'd have a bunch of states probably pushing back pretty hard against Canberra having something like that. But yeah, I think it's a really good point. Yes, Roll.
Hello.
Oh wait. So we'll go up the back and then we'll come down.
Hi, David. I just wanted to ask about what would you do as a senator on the topic of international student visa fee increases and international student caps, and I guess more broadly about the sense of exploitation that many international students face in Australia. So I'm an international student and also a student here at the ANU, and I've personally been quite concerned about how policies such as that the caps or the visa fee increases are things that are really harmful and discriminatory to many international students, who all of them provide so much to Australia's society and their studies, their work. And I guess also being targeted by a really racist rhetoric about like how our presence is the thing that causes like housing difficulties in the country, and also in light of like university governance being pointed the finger as like the reason behind university governance is in shambles when, you know, we know that this is not true.
Good question. The last parliament obviously had a government bill that was essentially university and a migration bill masquerading as a university integrity bill. Most of it, I think, made a lot of sense in terms of the integrity part, but there was the student caps, which really didn't make sense to me in a country where we've reduced funding to universities, we've starved them of research funding, we've made it harder and harder for them to do good research, and so they've gone out and said, well, international students is a way to actually pay for that, to cross-subsidise research. And the government had no plan to actually increase research funding. And so I thought it was really problematic. In Australia, we have no plan when it comes to immigration and population, and I think that leaves us really vulnerable to the kind of scapegoating and pointing at international students and saying, well, we're in a housing crisis, these are the people that are contributing to that. And I think there were a range of different figures as to just how much rental accommodation was taken up by international students, but it wasn't a big chunk. And I'd like to see a much broader conversation about university funding, research funding, international students, how they can come here and actually have a great education and a great experience. And I think one of the things that as Australians we need to reframe is how we think about international students. These are people who come here, get to experience Australia, get to know Australia, and then most of them go back to their home country. And it's diplomacy in a way. you've got people in countries all around the world who know more about Australia, have some sort of affinity to Australia. And so it seems nuts to be demonising those people. Yes, the visa fees are astounding, huge amounts of money. And so, it seems like you're just being viewed as a bit of a cash cow, and we'll slug you for a non-refundable big visa fee, and then you'll pay a lot for education. And then when we have problems with immigration, the sort of conversation around immigration will blame you. And I think we should be demanding better of our politicians here in Australia. I feel like these top two I've probably addressed in a bunch of the answers earlier. Who's next? No?
Thank you. Hi, Senator Pocock. Thanks for having this town hall. My name's Adnan Ali. I'm a physiotherapist here in the ACT. I don't know if you've heard, I have emailed your offices, but the NDIS have just announced huge cuts to funding in physiotherapy for care. And I see your campaign slogan, trust, integrity, and leadership. And I'm just hoping to have some leadership and some integrity from our politicians. The cuts are going to devastate our industry. I don't want to talk about money and cost. I'll talk about the people that we're trying to help. We have a health crisis in this country as well, and the NDIS was meant to help our most vulnerable people. These recent funding cuts that have just been announced that come into account in 3 weeks are going to devastate anyone with a disability. It's also going to drive our specialised carers, our physios, our OTs, all our allied health practitioners that have invested thousands of dollars and hundreds and thousands of hours of their time to help this population. It's going to cripple our industry. What are your thoughts, and how do you see this changing or helping it change the rhetoric around that?
Yeah, thanks for emailing. I was actually discussing this with Rory. Where is Rory? Right up the back. Today, looking at that, and it's something I'd love to chat more about and actually understand the changes. I'm not fully across the changes that are being made there. I think when it comes to the NDIS, there's agreement across Parliament that there is a need to actually look at the growth of the NDIS. It's on track to be 110 billion by the mid-2030s, 110 billion a year. But the way we do that has to be fair and actually make sense. One of the things that we have been looking at when it comes to allied health in other areas is the huge discrepancy between, say, you're a veteran, you're getting a certain amount back. If you're a pensioner, you're getting a certain amount back. If you're on the NDIS, you're getting a different amount back. And really looking at how do you actually come up with a better system that is fair and there's far more transparency and certainty for everyone involved.
Hello. Sorry, just to give you a bit of context with that, allied health spend in the NDIS is 1%. It's nothing.
Yeah.
But we keep people out of hospitals, so all the NDIA are doing is shifting the cost downstream, and it's going to be bigger. I've got a great example. I have a member of the community who had their funding cut from 15,000 to 2,000. They lost the ability to walk. Now they need $500,000 worth of stay-at-home care per year. How is that saving money?
No.
How's that saving money?
Yeah, and so as I said, like the cost savings actually make sense, and one of on a related, but I guess broader note, the lack of investment in preventative health in Australia is pretty shocking. I wasn't sort of aware just how little we spend. I think we're spending about 1.7, Rory, 1.7%, 2% of our health budget on prevention. There's a goal to get it to 5%. But no real way of getting there. And I think last time at estimates we were asking, the 2% actually included the COVID response, which is questionable.
Hello, Senator Pocock.
Hello.
My question actually relates a little bit to preventative care, actually. I see some on your Instagram stories, you can go on a run and stuff like that. You can appreciate how helpful physical exercise and things like that could be for both mild and severe forms of mental health. And I was just wondering, so they could be, if they can be considered on par sometimes or vital as, proper clinical care, could these forms of auxiliary care or something like that be ever supported financially by the government to a greater extent? Or is there any vision that you could see where things like that could be made more accessible to the public?
I mean, we've seen some countries actually go to sort of prescribing time in nature, outdoor activity. I think part of it is building our cities, reconfiguring our cities in a way where active travel and access to nature reserves is easy for people. I think here in Canberra we're really fortunate when it comes to nature reserves and nature. When it comes to active travel, not as much. I think there's a lot that could be done there. But yeah, I think this is a big opportunity to get more people moving at a time where we are seeing such a pretty dire outlook when it comes to mental health. And I think mental health, loneliness, these are huge issues in our society, and we should be looking at everything. And I think often the focus can be more on the sort of medicalized approach once you have something, rather than, well, how do we prevent people from actually getting there, or how do we provide people with off ramps as they realize, I need some help. But yeah, we'd love to hear more if you have ideas, and let's please get in touch. Sorry, I really can't see. Cool.
Yep. Sorry, my name's Craig Moritz. I'm an academic here. And I want to come back to the higher education issue. You clearly understand the malaise of current higher education, our overdependence on international students, etc. And it was completely absent from the last election campaign. What are we, thank you, what are we as academics or our students failing in to convince the public about the public good of universities?
I mean, should academics and students really have to make the case? Politicians know it. Most of them are university educated. A bunch of them had free university education. I don't know, in many ways I think it's about priorities and who provides the biggest cost to a political party to do something or not do something. If you look at a bunch of lobbies out there, they're willing to say to the government, listen, if you don't do this, we're going to come after you. We're going to run a campaign. We're going to make it hard for you. Whereas I think that education, they understand all this stuff. There's smart people in there. They understand that universities are struggling, that research is becoming harder and harder, that our best researchers in the country are spending 40-50% of their time filling out forms rather than working on problems. They know all this stuff. I just haven't seen the political will to say, actually, well, let's change it. Let's actually fund research. Let's find a way to ensure that our grants programs are working. So I really don't know. I think as a politician now, the blame has to be on us for not doing it. It can't be on you all for pushing it. But I don't know. I think there's a growing awareness about the urgency. I just haven't seen the political will so far, and that's something I know that there's a bunch of crossbenchers who've really been pushing them on. What else? And I don't know. Maybe in some way, people who work at universities love what they do. They're engrossed in their work, and they're probably not spending a lot of time, writing to their local member or I don't know, going to protests or whatever it might be. So, yeah, it's a hard one.
Hi. Hello.
Oh, sorry. Apparently, people can't see me online if I'm not on the stage.
Hello. I'm just up the back on your right. I have a question about the role.
Is there a way to turn down these lights a tiny
Yeah.
bit? Potentially be something that looks at a review of what's gone on.
Yeah, how's it going? Hello, sorry. Just for the record, we have had precisely one in-person town hall in which the Vice-Chancellor has never once come to. So this idea that consultation is happening in line with what is required by change management is just not the case.
Hello.
Is this on? Yeah. How's it going? I didn't know about this till today, so I'm a bit of a ring-in. So I've flown down from Brisbane. I'm here for the Whistleblowers Symposium tomorrow. So I'm a defence whistleblower. We've met once before briefly. But when we met, I wasn't able to tell you that I was a whistleblower publicly at the time due to powers that be. But I can say that Human Rights Law Centre Whistleblower Protections has now helped me, and I am 100% allowed to tell my story and am released from the powers that be, so to speak. So I wanted to thank you for everything that you're doing to champion whistleblower protections. My question is, I heard you speak earlier about this parliamentary of friends, and I just quickly did a Google, and there's no whistleblower friends there, so I'm wondering if there's anything we can do about that.
Yeah, I can talk to Andrew Wilkie and a few others. Firstly, thanks for your bravery. It really is it's a big thing. And yeah, just so disappointed to see the way we treat whistleblowers who are often risking it all to bring forward information that is in all of our best interest to know, and certainly something that I had a number of discussions with the former Attorney General Mark Dreyfus about encouraging them to do more in this term to really get our PIT Act up to scratch. Something like a Whistleblower Protection Authority, that was recommended 30 years ago by the Parliament. So there's so much more we can do, but yeah, all the best with your journey. Yeah, I hope it goes well.
Thanks for coming, and just to echo the remarks from the colleague up the back, this is the first actual town hall we've had in quite a long time at the ANU, even though there are a lot that are referred to by that terminology. So thanks.
Well, thanks for coming.
Thanks also for your interventions in the Senate and for other colleagues in the Parliament who are concerned about the situation of our universities. I think one of the concerns that I have is that there are some people in the Parliament who are interested to use inquiries and other interventions to reduce university autonomy. And without autonomy, we are not universities. We're just some other institution. So how do we balance this concern for the sorts of interventions we need to get the kind of support that we want to deal with the management problems that we have without undermining the autonomy of our universities?
That's a really good question, and something my team and I talk about a lot. And I think in the last Parliament, it was a really fine balancing act, and actually potentially not wanting to open up that sort of avenue because it's the Senate and people are going to use it for their sort of political ideology, and exactly as you said, there's a certain view that it's actually less funding for certain research, more constraints, and that's not the way we should be going. And so, yeah, how do you balance that? As I said, I think the governance inquiry is a good way to have it actually constrained a bit to governance. But yeah, a really good comment and question. It's something I'll obviously continue to work on in the Senate in finding those opportunities that doesn't open the ANU up to that sort of thing.
Yes. The problem of university councils not holding vice-chancellors to account, it's not just an ANU problem, it's an Australia-wide problem. And I think one of the problems is that most council members get almost all their information from the vice-chancellor. So you don't meet very often. The vice-chancellor gives you a briefing and that's your main source. But so do you think that part of the solution might be having more elected members of council so they have alternative sources of information?
It's certainly been. I mean, I'm no expert in governance. It's certainly been put to me that would really tip the balance if you had a majority of people who were elected. And again, like I think we need to go up a level and say, well, what are universities for? Like, this is about education, public good research. Should be a place where ideas can be challenged. These aren't big corporations, they're universities. And I think we've really got to remember that. And when you look at, there's been interesting work looking at, Australia with our VC salaries sort of going through the roof. It hasn't led to increases in rankings, and I think we do need to look at that. My colleague, Senator Jackie Lambie, has had a BNO bonnet about the pay of VCs and senior public servants, and actually had a bill before the last Senate to try and peg the maximum to the Treasurer's salary, which I think is $465,000 or so. I don't know if that went to an inquiry. Potentially not. But that's something that could actually be part of the conversation in the Senate if she reintroduces it and sends it to an inquiry. I think it's a really important conversation for us to be having.
Hi, I'll take the opportunity of half of the full question I'd like to ask being up on the on the projector to ask my full question, I suppose, which is to sort of stare in the face the question that's really staring, that we're looking at now, which is, there is a legislative apparatus available to Parliament to set the standards at the ANU, and therefore set a certain model or clear expectations, or to even use legislative terms like almost model legislation, right? A model governance system up, which would be through updating, amending, or replacing the Australian National University Act. Back matter on that is that none of this is in a vacuum. None of this is not being actively watched by the Higher Education Institute, but the Higher Education, Higher Education Industry Organization, which is essentially the managers, organization of universities in Australia. If it works at the ANU, and the litmus test of it working at the ANU could just be that it takes so long for consequences to happen that everything that they want to happen happens. Because we don't get there in time, even though we're talking about it and worried about it. If it lasts long enough, they've gotten it, right? With that in mind, this is, I think, a sort of unremarked crisis that's facing Australian higher education, not just universities, but all tertiary education. And we can't realistically have a modern economy without tertiary education. We can't do anything other than, we need specialist education. We need, CITs, TAFEs, universities, all sorts of things to be working and delivering the best possible possible outcomes to the most possible students, aside from the self-evident public good question. With that in mind, ANU Act, are these updates to it and amendments to it, are these being considered as possible recommendations of, for example, university governance inquiries that highlight specific problems at the ANU? Is there interest among the Senate Education Committee and the Minister, Jason Clare, at looking at this instrument in particular to sort of figure out the problem?
It's a really good point, and as I said earlier, I think we should be looking at that as a parliament. Like, how do we actually work out, or things aren't working across the sector? This is what, based on consultation, we think the gold standard is. Here's a university that actually answers to us. We've got an act, and let's put it in the act. As far as I know, this hasn't been something that government is considering, but certainly something that I'll be raising with Minister Clare when I meet with him. Yeah, it seems sensible to me.
May I? Over here.
Oh,
you can see me.
We'll go here, then we'll go up there.
Oh, sorry about that.
Go for it.
So I'm an academic at the ANU as well, but I'm going to ask about something different. I moved to Australia in 2007, and since then, every time I've heard sort of political discussion on refugees, it's been in the context of sending back the boats. I do some very minor volunteer work with refugee families and trying to sponsor. They've got families who have been in camps for over 20 years, and it's impossible. And I realize that we can't be the shelter to the entire world, but we are a wealthy nation, and we could certainly do a lot more. So I was wondering, is there any sort of impulse to improve things, because it's really been a decade of neglect, at least, and what precisely are you doing in that sort of area? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been awfully politicised, and I think in all the rhetoric, we lose sight of the fact that these are people with hopes and dreams, just like you and me, and have just found themselves in horrendous circumstances, and in most cases have had extraordinary resilience to actually survive and are wanting a second chance at life. In terms of our humanitarian program, the government will argue that we are generous with our sort of 20,000 places. One of the things I've been pushing them hard on is this fast track cohort, 10,000 or so people who have been in limbo for a decade, have no determination. Many of them have no study rights, no work rights. And a whole bunch of them arrived here as children, went to school, finished year 12, and then were told, well, you're 18, you can't study. And what a way to live. And at a time where we're crying out for workforce, all sorts of skills, and we have people who want to contribute who are right here now. So we should be looking to those people. And so that's been a real focus, trying to work with the sector and work with the government to get an undertaking to actually process and give those people certainty. The broader conversation around refugees and even our humanitarian program, I think we've seen just how political it is. The difference between Afghanistan, Ukraine, and then Gaza. Huge discrepancy. I think we should be looking at a more values-based approach. As a wealthy country, how do we want to actually treat people? What are the processes people need to go through? How does that work? What are the settlement services when they get here? And so I guess that's been my focus. Labor feels very wedged by the coalition on this, and so in the last parliament we really didn't see, I think, as much as people thought would happen in that space, but it's certainly something that myself and a lot of crossbenchers will keep pushing the government on. And I think in the broader context of climate change, this is something that we're going to have a plan for. if you look at the number of climate refugees that are going to be looking for a place to live in the next few decades.
Thank you. I'm right here, behind the previous question asker. I work at the Australian National University also, but I don't particularly want to talk about university governments. I'm just very grateful that you have our backs, I guess, because I honestly don't feel like we've had anything from the university executive apart from gaslighting. And it's from day one, and it's really demoralising. But my question is to do with something fairly different, namely Aboriginal deaths in custody. I think there may be some resonances with the previous question about refugees and asylum seekers, but the recommendations on Aboriginal deaths in custody must be at least 30 years old by now, and nothing seems to have improved. And I don't know what can be done, but I hope you can do something, because I really feel that the ACT has a responsibility to do more for Indigenous rights, particularly since we're the only the only territory in Australia to vote majority yes to the voice. I'd really like to see some action on it.
Yeah, pretty shameful if you look at the recommendations from the Royal Commission, and I think it came out recently that things like hanging points in cells, how like there was 57 or 60 Indigenous people had hung themselves from hanging points that were identified as problems but hadn't been removed, and so it just points to this sort of total lack of political will to actually deal with this. I think after the Voice referendum failed, we've seen Labor really step back from wanting to talk about First Nations issues in any way, which has been really disappointing. And they're kind of now talking about economic empowerment and all the kind of things that I think we heard from sort of way back the sort of John Howard era. But I think there's a real, I sort of get the sense from people in our community that they want this to be something that the government focus on. They see the inequity in it and the difference in life expectancy, the difference in life experience. And I think here in the ACT we're a little bit complacent. Yes, we voted yes, but if you look at Indigenous incarceration rates, rates of recidivism, health outcomes, a whole bunch of things, like we're not actually doing that well. And so I think it's on all of us to be pushing our local representative here in the territory to do better as a starting point, because again, it's one of these hard ones with federation where you've got state and territory issues and then federal issues. But I agree, there's so much more that can be done. And again, a little bit biased, but I think the crossbench really hammered the government in the last parliament to try and do more. And I think in the Senate, after Senator Dodson retired, there was a bit of a gap in Labor on this issue. But there's some good people in there, and I'm really hoping that they'll step up. We think we have time for one last question, then we'll finish on time.
Thank you so much. This might be a good one to end on. I wanted to start by thanking you because I was on maternity leave when the change management plans, the announcement about the finances came through, and one of the first things that ANU tried to cut was my childcare. And thanks, I think, largely to your intervention as well as that of other politicians, we lost the buildings, but we got to keep some of the educators who have been really important to my child's education and allowed me to be a productive member of staff at ANU. I work on authoritarian countries, and so I'm really excited. First of all, we're representing the field a little bit too well at the ANU at the moment. Secondly, I'm really pleased to be at events like this, which really showcase the strengths of democracy and democratic engagement. And I know that one of the best practices of democracy at the moment is co-design of laws and regulations and changes. And we happen to have at the ANU a number of extremely highly qualified staff with expertise in political science, in law, in the ANU as an institution. I'm wondering if you'd be open to a mechanism through which ANU staff could co-design a reform to the ANU Act with you.
Well, as this is the last question, thank you for the question. And yeah, it was a was I guess a good outcome on the early learning centres, but it could have been much worse. But I think still disappointing for a bunch of people. But a big thank you to so many people at ANU. You know, my staff and I, we're a small team, and we've relied really heavily on so many experts at the ANU, and have really appreciated the support and just how willing people have been to share expertise, talk through issues, give us background on certain things, and I think you're spot on. Like you all know the problems well, and you're experts in so many of these areas. We should be using that. So yeah, would certainly be open to and keen to engage further on this. I think the key will be to get the government on board, and so I guess that's part of my job, is to really work in the background and see what can be done there. But I think in terms of what that would look like, yeah, great idea. Let's chat more and see what that can look like. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate you coming out on a Tuesday night. Please do stay in touch. Know that I'll continue to advocate on this and a whole bunch of the other issues that we've talked about tonight. I really appreciate you all engaging like this. Thank you.